The Beaumont children don't talk to strangers. After more than 1,000 hours of research, this narrative podcast revisits Australia's most haunting mystery. Through the lens of memory, media, and myth, it explores how 3 children vanished from Glenelg Beach in South Australia 1966, how Australia's image of safety was shattered, and how hidden histories, from unreported harassment to systemic abuse, reshaped the city's story. This is not just the tale of a disappearance, but of the fragile sense of freedom and security communities built to protect themselves, and the truths that emerge when those myths collapse. On the morning of Australia Day, January 26, 1966, 3 children, Jane 9, Anna 7, and Grant Beaumont 4, left their home at Somerton Park in Adelaide, South Australia, and boarded a bus to Glenelg Beach. They never came home. Their disappearance became one of Australia's most haunting mysteries, reshaping how parents thought about safety, reshaping how police thought about abduction, and reshaping how the media told stories of loss. For nearly 6 decades, the case has been retold in books, documentaries, and endless speculation. But here's the problem. Much of what we think we know today is not based on fact. This podcast is the result of over 1,000 hours of research and is entirely based on fact. In Australia, January 1966 was the summer school holidays. The children's father, Jim Beaumont, explained that on Monday, January 24th, he had taken the children to Glenelg Beach and stayed with them the entire time. On Tuesday, January 25th, Jim dropped the children off at Glenelg Beach on his way to Snowtown, about 150 kilometres from Adelaide. Jim was going back to work after the Christmas holiday break, but Jim did not simply drive away. He stayed. Sitting quietly in his car, parked where the children could not see him, watching the children for half an hour before leaving. On the sand, Jane, Anna, and Grant blended easily with other children, laughing, running, absorbed in the carefree rhythm of the beach. To Jim, it must have looked reassuring. They were safe, they were happy, they were just like every other family's children on that crowded, hot summer morning. Only when he was satisfied did he leave for his business trip to Snowtown. Before dropping them off on the 25th, Jim told them, "Don't talk to strangers." When Jim gave them that father's instinctive caution, "Don't talk to strangers," it was a phrase so ordinary it might have passed unnoticed. But in hindsight, those words echo with unbearable weight. That quiet vigil of watching the children for half an hour tells us something important. This was not routine. This was the first time the Beaumont children had been left alone at Glenelg Beach. Jim's hesitation, his watchful half hour, his words of caution to not talk to strangers reveals a father negotiating the fragile line between trust and fear, between the cultural norm of independence and his own protective instinct. Leaving them alone at Glenelg Beach was not yet a settled habit, but an anxious experiment. As arranged, on January 25th, the children boarded the bus home around 2 p.m, arriving back safely at their house in nearby Somerton Park. Various quotes from Jim confirmed that none of the children had ever been to the beach on their own before. Only Jane and Anna together, who either walked or rode their bikes to the Broadway, which is near Somerton Park Beach and closer to their home. The Broadway, with its kiosk and change rooms, was a quieter stretch of beach where they were known to be safe. With Jim away at Snowtown on Australia Day, January 26th, Nancy Beaumont allowed the children to travel on their own back to Glenelg by bus. It was a decision she would later describe with anguish and deep regret because it was unprecedented. The 3 children had never made the trip alone before. Her recollection underscores the significance of that day January the 26th was the first time Jane, Anna and Grant had been entrusted with such independence. Nancy Beaumont blamed herself for having let the children go by themselves that day, stating that no matter what, she didn't accompany the children to Glenelg Beach and she was in the wrong. She stated how no one will ever make her feel any differently about it. Her children were gone and she had to live with that for the rest of her life. Jim and Nancy's words were spoken a few years after, when the Beaumonts had come to terms with the likelihood their children were gone. Regardless of what has been written in books or in the media decades later, the parents were confirming that Wednesday, Australia Day, January 26th, 1966, was the first time the three Beaumont children had gone to Glenelg Beach alone. To understand the significance of that choice on that fateful day, we need to step back into Adelaide in the 1960s. This was a city in transition. Television had only just arrived in 1959. The Beatles' visit in 1964 drew more than 300,000 people into the streets, a sign of a city opening itself to global culture. Suburban life was expanding, with Somerton Park and Glenelg representing the promise of seaside living. Families trusted their neighbourhoods. Children walked or rode bikes to school, played in the streets until dusk, and spent long summer days at the beach. To let children roam there was not unusual. It was part of the culture of freedom that defined the era. Glenelg itself was no ordinary beach. It was Adelaide's seaside playground, a place of fun fairs, rides, amusements, and crowds. On Australia Day 1966, thousands of people filled the foreshore. It was in this sea of faces, amidst the noise of laughter and the clatter of rides, that the Beaumont children vanished. And yet, beneath this image of innocence, there were shadows. In the aftermath of the Beaumont children's disappearance, police interviews revealed something startling. On Friday, February 4th, 1966, police reported that one of the most alarming developments in the Beaumont case has been what police describe as the staggering number of women who have now come forward to report for the first time cases of men exposing themselves indecently to women and children in the Glenelg area during the previous 3 months of the children's disappearance. In the 1960s, women rarely reported such experiences. Social norms discouraged them from speaking out, and the culture of the time often minimised or silenced these kinds of violations. That so many women stepped forward after the disappearance of the children was both a revelation and an indictment, evidence that beneath Glenelg's reputation for safety, there had always been an underlying danger. The incidence of sexual perversion in the Glenelg area is now shown to be a good deal greater than most people would ever have believed before the Beaumont case. These were not isolated stories, but a pattern, one that had gone largely unspoken until the shock of the Beaumont children disappearance created a space for disclosure. Decades later, the Children in State Care Commission of Inquiry, the Mulligan Report, confirmed what many had long suspected, that abuse was not isolated but systemic. Among its findings were harrowing accounts of sexual abuse suffered by young girls at the Seaforth home, situated at 20 Tarleton Street, Somerton Park, a large 2-storey building on about 4 acres, close to the beach and close to the Beaumont's house at Somerton Park and Glenelg Beach. Seaforth Home was an institution meant to provide care and protection for destitute, displaced or neglected girls up to 18 years old. Instead, survivors testified that it became a place of sexual exploitation. In 1966, there would have been around 80 girls residing there. The report describes how girls as young as 11 were being assaulted by staff, by older residents, by foster carers, by tradesmen, and by other men given access to Seaforth Home. Some were taken off site and abused. Others were targeted within dormitories and bathrooms. Alcohol and cigarettes were sometimes used to groom or silence them. Many carried the trauma in silence for decades, believing no one would believe them or fearing punishment if they spoke out. One woman described being raped repeatedly by a staff member while in Seaforth's care. Another recalled being taken out of the home by men for sexual exploitation, facilitated by staff. She stated that while at Seaforth home, she and 15 to 20 other residents, girls all under 16, were taken to a nearby hotel for a dinner. She recalled that the matron lined them up before they went and said to behave and to do as they were told, and they would get lollies if they were good. At the hotel, several men in suits were sitting at tables and every girl had to sit next to a man. She stated that after the dinner, the man next to her led her from the dining room and took her upstairs to a bedroom and had sex with her. All the other girls went upstairs, one at a time with a different man. When they came back down, they were given ice cream. The children were taken back to Seaforth home on a bus and then given lollies. It was made clear that they were not to repeat to anyone else what had happened. Several survivors spoke of lifelong trauma, broken trust, and feelings of abandonment by the system meant to protect them. There are many other incidents at Seaforth home that I am not prepared to speak about during this podcast, but I encourage all listeners to read the section on Seaforth home in the Mulligan Report, available online. The inquiry also investigated deaths of children connected to Seaforth home and placed the home among South Australia's most problematic state-run institutions. Commissioner Mulligan himself wrote that he had not been prepared for the foul undercurrent of society revealed in the evidence, nor for the lifelong consequences survivors carried. Seaforth home was closed and demolished in 1975, and the grounds are now known as Seaforth Park, which offers various facilities like a playground, tennis court, barbecue areas, and toilets, open for public use between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. So while in 1966, Adelaide celebrated Glenelg as a safe haven for children, young girls in institutional care, just streets away from Glenelg, were enduring systemic sexual abuse. The proximity of Seaforth home to the Beaumont family's world in 1966 is haunting, both in the same suburb of Somerton Park and very close to the Broadway, where Jane and Anna would walk or ride their bikes to the beach. Adelaide's self-image as safe was always fragile, curated, and incomplete. The Seaforth home revelations complete a disturbing picture. The Beaumont case is not only about a disappearance, it is about the silences that surrounded danger, the voices ignored, and the truths that only emerged decades later. It is about the way communities curate their own histories, choosing what to remember and what to forget. When we revisit those days when the Beaumont children vanished, Jim's watchful half hour, Nancy's anguished decision, the women who finally spoke out and reported indecent exposure at Glenelg, and the girls in Seaforth home who were silenced by stigma and fear, we are forced to confront the fragility of safety itself. Safety was never absolute. It was a story Adelaide told itself, a story that dissolved under the weight of tragedy and testimony. The disappearance of Jane, Anna, and Grant Beaumont is often remembered as the moment Adelaide lost its innocence. But innocence is not something that can be lost in a single day. It is something constructed, curated, and fiercely protected in memory. The truth is that Adelaide in the 1960s was never as safe as it liked to believe. Women were already living with harassment they felt unable to report. Children in state care, just streets from Glenelg, were enduring systemic abuse that would only be acknowledged decades later. And even in the Beaumont family itself, Jim's caution on the day before their disappearance and Nancy's anguish in the 1968 interview show that parents felt the tension between freedom and fear. What the Beaumont children disappearance did was reveal the reality that danger had always been present, just unspoken. In 1966, Adelaide told itself that it was a city of safety order and innocence, and the reality that danger had always been present, just unspoken. In the decades since, books and documentaries have often painted a picture of mid-1960s Adelaide as a safe, almost idyllic city, a place where children roamed freely, where parents trusted the streets, the parks, and the beaches. The Beaumonts were not unusual in allowing their children independence. In fact, it was part of the culture, an unspoken confidence that nothing could go wrong. If the Beaumont parents had the factual knowledge of what I have discovered during over 1,000 hours of research, would they then have allowed their children to roam freely, to be back home before the streetlights came on, as current publications and media have projected? I don't think so. And so this ends my podcast's episode 1 about the Beaumont children, highlighting Jim Beaumont's words to his children on the previous day of their disappearance. Don't talk to strangers. More episodes to follow. Thank you for listening.